that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello everybody. Forewarning, it is very windy today, so if you hear banging and crashing, and possibly dogs barking, well, it's because they're getting scared of the wind, which is pretty strong today. When you're watching this, hopefully this is way later, in terms of the safety of LA, where I happen to live. I won't say where, because doxing. But it's January for me, and well, one, I turned 24. Two, cities are burning, so the winds are quite dangerous. But that should be old news by the time this video comes out. That being said, for any hiccups, that's why I'm explaining that to you. It's been hard to focus on this book, especially this book, with all the stuff going on, but I'm trying my best. So we'll get into the book now, and any hiccups or interruptions, forewarned apologies. Thank you. On to Fall of Light by Steven Erickson, the second book in the Kharkanas trilogy, which, as of December on Facebook, Steven Erickson had said, of 2024, I mean, that he was 200 pages into Walk of Shadows, so it's either out by now or should be coming out probably soonish. I guess we'll see. This might have aged poorly, but he is writing it at the time of recording this. But anyway, second book of the Kharkanas trilogy. And we have part 1, The Seduction of Tragedy. We're discussing books 1 and book 2. Book 2 being, if I can see real quick, In One Floating Breath. I want to give my overall thoughts on these first two parts. Of course, I don't have the whole context of the book. I haven't finished the book yet. So this is just my thoughts on the first 500 pages, because that's about the portion of the first two books. And then, of course, but the whole book is 840 pages long, at least in the edition I have, so we're nearing the end. But the largest portion of the book seems to be what I've read, whereas the shorter portion is the following. Anyway, this is Told Hounds on steroids. Political, theological, philosophical, ecological. I'm using big words, but they actually mean something. Whether it be about the environment, or about politics, or about civilization, or about philosophical themes and meanderings, this is the God Emperor of Malazan. If you haven't read God Emperor by Frank Herbert, it is, and I know that I don't even think Steven Erickson's read that far in those books, because I think he said one time he stopped at the first book and just never continued it on. I don't know if that's still true. It's been some years, but the fourth book in the Dune series by Frank Herbert is 20% plot, 80% philosophical meanderings by the god worm human man Leto Atreides II, who is the son of Paul Atreides. Anyway, the point that if you want to see my review of that, I have a review of that. But my point is that the book is primarily philosophical musings for a good portion of it. As compared, like, if you cut out all that stuff, you'd have like a 2-hour film in terms of what actually is happening in the plot. It's not as egregious as that, I think, because the plot's always kind of progressing. It's just rather slow. So, like, maybe you'll have two characters who are on their way to reach this location. So while they are walking with their horses, or, riding with their horses to that particular location, big philosophical conversation, bop, 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 bop. But it's one after the other. And it's beautiful. The prose are excellent. It's written extremely well. Erickson cannot fail in this department. I'm going to be honest, I've read Game of Thrones. I haven't reviewed them. I plan on doing a reread at some point, though since I haven't done actual reviews of them, I'll probably just call it a review. But that's a long time down the line because I don't like that I'm going to read a series that isn't concluded, so I don't really want to invest all that time for no payoff. I'm sure you can understand. But I think Steven Erickson may be the greatest fantasy writer of my time. And you know, back in the day, we had Tolkien, and he will always hold that spot as one of the greats. We had Robert Jordan with A Wheel of Time, which I still haven't read, but I know how prolific it is. You know, in like the 90s, the 80s, whatever. And then Erickson for basically all the 2000s to now. I mean, I haven't read all fantasy, so who am I to say? But I have to say, this is quite. He has never failed to have the most exquisite prose, um, while also delivering a very good story. Um, all done in a roundabout way. The plot progresses very slowly to me. It feels quite indulgent at times, because it wouldn't be as bothersome, but a lot of the themes that Erickson tries to evoke through conversations in this book, it's not like it's treading new ground. We've had these conversations in the Book of the Fallen, so it feels like a bit of a rehash. I mean, it's always told expertly well, it's always beautiful, it's always engaging, but again, it's also like we've been here before and we're still like kind of like stuck on this point or this theme, which I understand why for this story it would be relevant, but it's just kind of like you spent so much philosophical stuff in the Book of the Fallen that to just do it again, it's a little much. And it's so much for your brain to think about, and it's so weighty and so meaty, and it's back to back to back to back, which in of itself is genius and quite astounding on the part of Erickson, but at the same time it's like it's exhausting at parts to read this. It's not that it's bad. I mean that by any means. It's exhausting to go big thing, big thing, big thing. By big thing I don't mean big things happening in the plot. I just mean big conversation with a lot of meat to think about, to the next, to the next, to the next. It's a lot to kind of try to invest in. Forge of Darkness, I feel, did it to utter perfection, maybe even better than Toll the Hounds in terms of balancing all of that. To telling the plot that I wanted to tell, to having excellent, amazing character moments for those characters in Forge of Darkness, to also having those philosophical meanderings. I felt like it did all those things and paced it out beautifully. Absolutely. I don't think you could make it any more perfect than that in terms of spacing all out. But here, the plot, I feel personally just kind of like goes. I mean, it's always progressing. I don't want to say like it goes away. Like it's always present, but it feels really slow, at least to me. And again, this might have something to do with at this point in time I got fires going on, and just kind of got me distracted. But there's so much of this philosophical stuff going on that it feels like the plot just isn't going anywhere. Even though it is, and I'm not saying it isn't. It's not the problem of God Emperor, where literally it's just this worm man just kind of sitting there pondering for like pages upon pages upon pages upon pages upon pages of stuff. The plot does progress. I don't want to act like it doesn't. It just, there was something about Forge of Darkness that just, it was just, it was just perfect. Whereas this, it definitely feels like Erickson's kind of indulging this side of him that loves to do this. A little bit to the detriment of the flow of the story, I feel personally. And again, I'm not Erickson. I can't even write as good as Erickson, so who am I to say? But, I didn't really have these problems with Book of the Fallen, and have this problem with Forge of Darkness, and have this problem with Botulin and Corbelow in their short story adventures. But I do feel that a bit here because they're back to back to back to back, and there's not enough. In Book of the Fallen, we had the everyman, we had the everyday people who talked a bit more normal, and had more basic conversations that were funny or this or that. It kind of balanced out all of that, to make that a little bit more bearable when the philosophical stuff came in. But in this, everybody's kind of like on the same tier of intelligence, or maybe that's the wrong word, but like everybody here's kind of like a philosopher. And so it's just back to 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 back, and it's a lot. And I don't want to further go on, and I kind of feel like I'm kind of repeating myself, so I'm gonna move on from that point. Um, but it's a lot. but I do enjoy it. That to be said, the next thing to mention is we are continuing off of Forge of Darkness, and there seems to be the start of this civil war. I think a year has passed. I may be a bit confused about that, but I believe a year has passed, so we are now a year into the civil war between Draconis, who has the Tisti. We have the Tisti Leosin, who now exist, and we have the Tisti Eater, though they're kind of more in the background. They're not really essential to the war going on. Hold on a sec. Yeah. Part 1, Seduction of Tragedy. Opening 2 pages. I don't remember what I meant by that, but they were some good opening 2 pages. Lord Yasunder is now the light of the Lord of Light. There's a lot of complexity to Hun Rao, who seems to be kind of this era's Malik Rel in terms of his political scheming. So that's cool. We meet 2 of Lord Animander's most powerful people in his military, I guess, which is Prazik and Dathanar, and they're a lot of fun to read about. Pure Rake, which is the name of the family, stands for strength in standing still, which is what Animander is not doing. But he actually takes away Pure Rake to only keep Rake, so that he only has the Animander strength. And my dog's gonna keep barking, and you're just gonna have to deal with it. I'm not gonna turn it off again. I'm so sorry. We meet a young child named Wereth, who I'm not sure is an eater or not, but we have the 3 different types now of Teist, which there wasn't before. We also meet a person named Glyph, who is a denier. Sorry, I just don't have the enthusiasm I did, because I've now tried to do this 10 times. You only saw it a couple of times. I've now tried 10 times, so I try to be professional, but I live with animals, and they don't like to be nice. So, Skillen and Kroll, which is a really fun duo. Really enjoy seeing what they're all about. We meet Tethenel and Ravis Tethenel. Yeah, they're interesting. We also know at this point in time that Male is already a god at this time. He's actually an Azanthani, as we learn, which is pretty cool. Nightchill is also around at this time. And they're all Azanthani. We have Brood and Draconis, who are on separate paths. We have an interesting conversation with Gothos on friendship. And then we have Prazik and Danthanar, Abuses of the Peasant, which was a really interesting philosophical little pondering they had there, and they're always fun to read about. They're very much like this series' Bug and TL. So just give me one last sec. Trying to launch your room. It probably won't make it better, but gonna try. Anyway, almost done anyway. We have book 2 in one fleeting breath. So Animander and Kaladin Brood meet Rennick, and he kind of pals along with them. Silchis kind of ponders magic and the creation of existence, and the old adage, who created God? Now, most of this book is very profound. Very, very beautiful musings and interesting philosophical ponderings. However, people probably think this is like high caliber thing. Now this has happened again. This happened during Toll the Hounds, and it comes here and there. To somebody who is not well versed in philosophy or theology, or has not listened to a simple debate ever between an atheist and a Christian, or any combination of those sort of things, you've heard a lot of these arguments before. So it's nothing. Most of what Erickson, with his particular topic, has is very elementary. This is, if you took Debate 101 on this subject, You would have heard this time and time and time and time and time again. This is nothing new. So, the whole point of doing reviews is to give your unique perspective, right? And I know no one else is going to talk about it, so I guess I will. So it's, of course, this is fiction. So this is all about, but this is all about themes and layers, and this is also meant to apply to real life. So this is also, it may not be a hard argument against, but it's still a thing that is brought up in the real world. So I'm going to address it from my particular standpoint. So. In the Malazan universe, right? So far, as far as I can tell, every single god that exists, whether it be in the Book of the Fallen or in this book, was at one point created. So I'm left to assume that any god before that must also be created. And so it does raise the interesting question: is could there be an ultimate god in terms of like an actual like creator of the universe who has always existed? In Erickson's work, I really don't believe so. But it's certainly a possibility, I guess. I don't think that's the direction he would go, based on what it seems like he is in real life. It doesn't seem like something he would do. As for real life, now you could believe that religion is fiction, and that's fine. That's fine. But if we're going to critique things, we have to critique them within universe, right? So if I'm reading a James Bond book or watching a James Bond movie and they start introducing magic, that's going to suspend my level of disbelief because the universe has not established that that's something that is the norm, right? So I will critique that in universe to say that is a flaw of the film, to just randomly introduce magic. In the same way, I wouldn't say the same thing in Harry Potter, because in Harry Potter, magic exists. So it's not something to be like, oh well, that's a flaw of the film to just randomly introduce it. No, that's a part of the integral part of the world building, is that there is magic. Same thing with Book of the Fallen. So again, like whether religion is true or not is not really the debate here. It's the critiquing in universe. What does it mean? So when somebody goes to, well, who created God? Well, in the context of at least the monotheistic religions, which would be Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, the God that they believe in has always been, always will be, never came into existence. And then people try to go, well, who created God? As if that's some sort of trump card. But if we were willing to play this game, then whoever created God would be God. Which means that if something created God, then that's not God. That's a secondary figure. The thing that created it is God. The thing that determines it, what is the right word? Categorically is a uncreated thing. It would be a spaceless, timeless, immaterial being, a being that has always been. That would be God. So it just becomes an infinite regress to reach the same original point, which is God. And the same thing when people try to get into quantum physics or the idea of multiple universes as a way to escape God, right? Because there's infinite universes, so there's infinite possibilities. So, because this is also meant to destroy the argument of the fine-tuning argument, which is that our universe is so, or our planet specifically, but the universe is so exactly perfect we happen to be on the perfect planet for life, and that had it been even like a decimal off of where we are in orbit, that we wouldn't be able to sustain life. So it's just, everything is finely tuned for our existence on this particular planet. Now there's things about climate change and all that, which is definitely stuff that this book brings up, and I know the God is not willing to bring up, and that's a whole separate thing. But in terms of the billions of years having been here, we are on the perfect spot in the galaxy to exist. So then people go fine-tuning. It must have been created. So then people go, okay, well, if there's infinite universes, then we just are lucky, And there's infinite universes, so there's infinite places where there is life. And we're not special, right? So we have to destroy that. But the problem with the multiple universe theory is that it still involves the Big Bang. So inevitably, at some point, there was a starter to the infinite universe, because we know the universe is expanding, so it hasn't always existed, which means that every universe has not always existed, which means there's a regress going on, and we're getting a big scientific thing. But basically, even with an infinite universe, if everywhere, there would still be a starting point, so which created all of the universes, and that would be God still, would be the argument. So point being, the who created God only works in Malazan because that is literally the norm, that gods get created. But in real life, if you're going to critique somebody who was religious, specifically of a monotheistic faith, you couldn't really say that to them. So that was my long rant to say, like, again, I've heard these things, and if I had never looked into philosophy or theology or any of that, this would be really profound to me. But as it stands, I've heard this ad nauseum. It's very elementary. It's one of the first things you kind of hear about when you listen to any debate. Like, you look up one debate on YouTube, you will hear this concept brought up. It is nothing new. But then again, I guess that's the point, right? Nothing new under the sun, Ecclesiastes. But then also, like, history repeats itself, as we see here with stuff going on, which, well, similar things will happen in Book of the Fallen, so I suppose. Then we also have faith, and Erickson's idea of faith, or at least what the characters in the book seem to suggest that faith is, which it, just for reference in real life, that faith in the Greek term is pistis, which is simply trust. I just don't find that portion of the story compelling when it's trying to be like, oh, look at this, is so profound. It's not. It's there's a little bit of history research, because it's meant to be like this whole thing of faith is inherently like this thing of trusting in things you cannot see. No, it's not faith, it's trust. That's what the Greek pistis, faith, trust. In the same way, if you are married, right, you have a partner, man, woman, whatever, there's a possibility that they could cheat on you for whatever reason. You have no proof that they can't or won't. You trust, based on the relationship that you've made, that they won't. Right? You have no proof that. How do you prove that scientifically? You just go based off of the evidence of who they've shown you to be. Right? But beyond that, you can't go inside their head. You can't know. So you trust in them. So that is all that faith means in a religious sense. So this whole, like, believing in things you can't see thing is just, it's just not true. Maybe it is in Malazan, but in real life, that's not what it means. Anyway, like I said, most of this book really makes me think, but when we get to certain sections like that, where I know some people read this who have never picked up a philosophy course or a theological course, and will go, this is so profound, and it's just not. Anyway, Ophuntel can transfer his soul into wolves, which is interesting. There's nothing really done with that yet, but it's something I wrote down because I figured that's important enough. Your Sunder not wanting to marry Mother Dark is also because he's the Lord of Light right now, and she's Mother Dark. And certain people want a union between them to make peace between the factions. But they don't really, I think Mother Dark may be okay with that, but your Sunder most definitely is not. We also have a really interesting / weird scene with Hunral and Olara Phil talking to him, and then she, like, messes with his mind and, like, grabs his penis through the fire, and then she leaves, and he's, like, actually, like, standing, like, right next to it, so it's like clothes are burning. I don't know, and he's like, and that hurt, and it was painful, but I kind of want more. I don't know, it was a weird scene, but that's something. So they're kind of allying now. Also, Olara Phil is playing a big part of this story, which is, I think, great, because she only kind of popped up in the last 2 books of, I mean, she might have been mentioned prior, I don't remember at this point, but she played a big role in Dust of Dreams and The Crippled God, so it's cool to see her play a big role in the past. Then we meet Hanako and Raced. Yes, the villain of Book 1 of Book of the Fallen, Gardens of the Moon. We have Raced back. And also something we can learn with Raced is that he's rather complex. He's not just pure evil. He's kind of portrayed that way in the Gardens of the Moon. But there's a bit more to him than that. He seems to be very pessimistic, which I can very easily see him leading him to villainy in the future. But obviously we know it goes awry because, well, we kind of know the backstory. He kind of becomes a tyrant. But there's a lot of pessimism in this book with him. So I think it's clear to see the seeds of dissent that will fall him. Moving on. We have a scene between Skillen, Kroll, and Mael, which was really cool to see him again. There's also an angry god that is trapped in a finesse that Andrist and what's the other girl's name? Is it Triss? I forget, but there's another girl with him. I forget who it was. But they find an angry god trapped in a finesse. We also have a interesting scene between Animander and Ivus, this other character, and we really get to see kind of like some of the regret he has with his brother from the last book, but that he's kind of still determined on this vengeance path. So that's interesting. You also see a lot more of a little bit of his vulnerability in this section. There's also a scene with Envy, like trying to mess with Rennick, and Rennick's able to resist it, which is pretty cool. It's really interesting too with this particular section because Rake and Brood have this kind of like uneasy friendship where they're not very nice to each other. But we know that in Book of the Fallen they're like as close as can be. So it's an interesting thing here. We also get some big drops at the very end of this part 2 of the book, which is that Olar Thil is Brood's sister. So that was I don't know if they ever mentioned that before, but to me it was a big revelation. Also, this also might have been stated, I either forgot or this is brand new and I'm not crazy, but Spite and Envy are actually Olar Thil's daughters. They're not Mother Darks. They're Olar Thil's, which means that Olar Thil had a thing with Draconis in the past, which would explain a scene in Forge of Darkness where they seemed a little too comfy with one another. But yeah, Spite and Envy are her daughters. Also, we get this, I don't even know how to describe it to you, so I'm not going to really try, but this is really trippy end to this section of the book, and we have Corlat's birth. And we all know Corlat from the Book of the Fallen, so that is interesting. But yeah, so she's born here, which, of course, I don't know how it will end with her in Walk in Shadows, but we know where she will be in Book of the Fallen. So there's that. And that's pretty much in the end in terms of my initial thoughts on Fall of Light. Like I said, it's a bit more difficult to get into, but it's still great. Still better than most things I've read. And I look forward to the finale. And I'll give you my overall thoughts next time, with hopefully less interruptions. So until next time, I don't know. But all I know is that even though Steven Erickson is like, how much do I have to beat it over your head that Animander is not somebody to idol? I mean, sure, he's very flawed here, but he's pretty epic in Book of the Fallen, so I'll just say Rake and Brood team all the way. They got my vote. Until next time, we'll see you.